Hey, I'm Michelle. Welcome back to my channel. We're going to talk about all the books that I read in January, and it was a really good month. I read a total of 8 books. But before we begin, can we just appreciate this shirt for a minute? Okay, it's covered in stars. It's like my favorite pattern ever. I am so excited to be the proud owner of this. I found it at a thrift store. My favorite thing. I always find the best things at thrift stores. And I also have these, I hope you can see them. I don't know. I don't know what you can see, but I have these really cool hair clips that match. So, all right. So the first book that I finished in January was Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. I've been wanting to read a Kurt Vonnegut for a really long time, and I'm really glad that I picked this up. This is about a guy named Billy Pilgrim who is sent to Dresden, and Dresden gets bombed. And then he's taken as prisoner of war and afterwards suffers from PTSD. So he goes throughout his life, and you follow him as having these vivid flashbacks that are taking him back and forth through different periods. So he calls this being unstuck in time. At one point, he's also abducted by aliens called the Trafalgarians. I cannot say that. They apparently are friendly aliens. They abduct him from Earth, take him to their planet, strip him naked, put him in a zoo, and conduct experiments on him. When they bring him back home, no time had passed. So then we have this whole thing, if he tells people, he knows that they're not going to believe him. So this book is pretty short, but it ended up taking me quite a bit longer to get through than expected. I think there was a lot of things contributing to that. One of them just being, honestly, it wasn't always the most enjoyable, just because I kind of felt bored. But it doesn't mean I didn't like it. I liked what the book was doing, getting used to Kurt Vonnegut's writing style. One thing I really liked about this that struck out to me first was the storytelling, I guess, in the way that he can take you through different moments of time suddenly and can still follow along with what's supposed to happen. It's very clear where he's at, what time he's at. Also, because of the way this is written, I do feel like this is one of those books that you read in short reading sprints. Being somebody who has multiple books, this is something I like to make note of. Just a little side note. Kurt Vonnegut also writes with a very dark humor, and I really liked that. I think what makes it so funny is because he takes these very heavy, serious topics, for instance, the death of somebody or something. He's just very cavalier about the whole thing. Every time somebody dies, they always end it with, "so it goes." There's just something really funny about that to me. I just feel like it's very much in line with my own sense of humor and my own coping mechanisms. There's tons of other stuff packed into these pages, like all of the quirky characters that you meet, how Billy responds to them, like his fiance. It's really kind of awful. The fact that he has the audacity to talk about his fiance that way is funny. So there's another example of the type of humor that he has. So if you've not read this book and you're going to read this book, I'm going to warn you that there's a character named Laszlo in here, and he's going to start talking about a dog. Just skip it. Just skip Laszlo and the dog, because the imagery, you will not come back from that. So this is one of Vonnegut's most well-known works, and I believe that it's supposed to be semi-autobiographical. Kurt Vonnegut himself was a prisoner of war. This is also supposed to be much different than any of his other works, so I am really interested in reading more from this author. Now, this book was not a favorite. I ended up giving this book 3 to 3.5 stars, but it's a good 3 stars. I'm just really happy that I did read this book for all the reasons that I mentioned: his writing style, the things that I learned, and getting to know his dark humor. I do actually think that one day I would definitely read this book again, just because now that I understand his writing style, I understand the way this book was told. I also think that I did a lot of research before going into this book. There were certain things that I think I was waiting for. So maybe I wasn't giving the rest of the book as much attention because I think that I would get a lot more out of it if I gave it one more chance. One other thing about this book. This book is considered an anti-war book. I'm not sure why it's considered an anti-war book, except for the fact that, especially during the time it was written, that maybe by him writing this book, he was finally telling the story of what it is for soldiers who witness so much tragedy that a lot of them end up with PTSD and kind of take some of the heroism out of being a soldier and the glory of war, because there is a really real aspect to it, like suffering with PTSD for the rest of your life. Because our main character, I guess I forgot to mention that too. So this has a lot to do with mental health. Has all these flashbacks going back into the war, and that's no fun. But also it starts driving him so crazy that he goes to a mental institution for a time. Yeah, I mean, it just really messes with him. I guess that's how it becomes an anti-war book, because maybe a lot of people didn't know how much one can suffer when you see all that. So moving on. So the next book I read, Reckless Girls by Rachel Hawkins. Now, I just realized that this is the third book I've read by this author. Another series that she wrote is called Hex Hall, and it's funny because I've had this on my wish list on Hoopla for so long. It sounded really good, so I might have to give that one a try sooner rather than later as well. So let's get back to Reckless Girls. Reckless Girls, this is a summer themed, and it follows a couple. The female's name is Lux and her boyfriend's name is Nico. They met up in California. She was a waitress. She was a waitress or bartender in California, and she was trying to save up money so that she could travel. And then she meets Nico, who has a boat. So they decide to sail to Hawaii, save up some money, fix up the boat, go off on more adventures. They go off to this island. Unfortunately, another couple has already gotten there. So they decide to share the island. They start nearing the end of their trip, and this solo guy comes to the island. And then things start to go downhill. Really fun book. It was fast paced. It was a page turner. It was quite short. I think I like that in a thriller, to be honest. Still kind of trying to figure out where I'm at with thrillers. But I did like this one. I did like The Wife Upstairs. Both kind of the same style as far as being quick. Ending, I did not see that coming at all. It was a very satisfying ending. I really think that it's perfect for a busy summer because it really doesn't require a whole lot from the reader, and it's easy to dip into. The next book I read was The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. This one was for a reading challenge for the Read Your Bookshelf challenge. Again, I'll leave all that information in the description box below. I made a whole video, which I'll probably leave up here in the cards. So if you want to check that out. Anyway, so I did complete this book. The very first challenge was to read a book with a quiet word in the title. This one is a psychological thriller. Personally, I recommend knowing nothing going into this. The very bare bones of this book is about a woman named Alicia, and she murders her husband and then she quits talking. So they send her to a mental institution, and then this young psychotherapist comes in with the confidence that he believes that he can get Alicia to talk, get to the bottom of what happened. This book mostly was a hell of a shocker at the end. It did not disappoint. That was what everyone has said. They weren't lying. Unfortunately, with this author, his most recent book, The Maidens, is going around, and a lot of people aren't liking it. I did read that one also. I didn't care for it. But don't let that stop you from reading this book, because this book is definitely worth it. It's so good. The writing was really nice and quick paced. It was definitely a page turner. It kept me interested. I really thought that it was cool that Alicia is an artist. Her subject matter is quite a bit strange, but whatever. I would say the only things that perhaps had me rolling my eyes, and I wonder if it isn't enhanced because of the fact that what he did with the maidens, but he's got a lot of Greek mythical references, and I feel like it was pretty heavy and a little bit forceful. Like he wanted to make sure that the reader did not miss that he was dropping names. I wonder if it wouldn't have been as apparent, except that I was expecting that from this author because of other videos that I've watched, and because that was another aspect of The Maidens that I really hated. Both of these books are definitely supposed to cater heavily to Greek mythology. It just felt, again, like it was just being really forcefully pushed on the reader. Maybe this is really great for people who are really into Greek mythology. I am not that I'm not into Greek mythology, I just have a really hard time remembering all the gods, remembering all the characters, remembering all their stories. So I don't feel like I know a lot about Greek mythology. One of the biggest references that I would like to talk about is not a story-based reference. It was more of like the surface level references. And if you know, you know, I guess. The biggest one I want to talk about is there's a character who's a nurse at the mental institution called Diomedes. That's obviously a Greek reference. Like, you can't miss that one. I decided to look up the name. The Troilus and Cressida legend. This was specifically mentioned. Diomedes plays an important role in the medieval legend Troilus and Cressida, in which he becomes the girl's new lover when she is sent to the Greek camp to join her traitorous father. In Shakespeare's play of that title, Diomedes is often seen fighting Troilus over her. Okay, that's what I really wanted. So the role that Diomedes plays, I kind of was looking for him to mirror the role in the book. However, it didn't seem to me that he really did. Probably because they didn't want to spoil anything. But then it kind of feels unnatural because no modern day person would be called Diomedes. So, what do you think? Should characters adopt the role of their namesakes, especially when they are something like this? This is actually something I talked about in another video. Aristotle and Dante discover the universe. Yeah, I definitely talk about that in that as well. Like, should those characters take on those roles as well? I kind of feel like they should. Otherwise, what's the point in giving them these names? Because I feel like it's maybe a little misleading, or maybe they're just cool names. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know. I'm dying to know what people really think about this. The next book that I read was The Mysterious Fair at Styles by Agatha Christie. If you've been around here as well, you probably heard me asking about these books and noticing that there is this big resurgence of Agatha Christie's books. Everywhere I turn, someone's talking about Agatha Christie. They're trying to solve the mysteries in our books, or characters in books that I'm reading are talking about Agatha Christie, and they're reading Agatha Christie. And I have never read Agatha Christie, so this month I read my first Agatha Christie. I was definitely having a case of FOMO. It took me a little while because I honestly didn't know where to start. I kind of feel like you should maybe start at the beginning, so I waited until I could acquire the first book. After reading that, I have decided that I'm probably not going to read all of them in order. I'm probably just going to pick out some of the most iconic books and just read those, because I am still interested in reading them after reading this book. So this book particularly is a mystery concerning poison. Poison being the catalyst. And I really like that. I really like books where poison is involved. So I did find it really interesting. I did give this book like 3 stars. It's a good 3 stars, you know. So there will be more Agatha Christie in the future. I think the next one I'm going to read is the Roger Ackroyd one. The next book that I finished is Dune by Frank Herbert. I feel like I've talked about this a lot, and I've talked about my feelings and my reading experience with this so far. Ultimately, it was amazing. I loved it. This was a gift that I got for Christmas for my husband, which I also made a recent video about that. Dune is this epic science fiction novel that takes place on Arrakis, or also known as Dune, which is this desert wasteland. It's covered in sand dunes. The universe is ruled by an overarching government called the Imperium. The Imperium kind of dictates who is going to rule each planet or whatever. So for the longest time, the Harkonnens have ruled Dune, but I forget exactly why, but they decide to go in a different direction and put Duke Leto Atreides on Dune. So they kick the Harkonnens out, the Baron Harkonnen, they kick him off the planet, and Leto and his family have to leave their beautiful home planet for this desert wasteland, and it's very challenging. Now, on Dune, there is a spice called spice, or melange, I think they call it, but for the most part, they just call it spice. They're harvesting this planet for spice. It is a hot commodity. It's like salt. It is sought after. You can't live without it. To live without it would be to stop traveling the universe and things like that. So it is essential. Plus, people have become addicted to it and all this other kind of cool stuff. Okay, so the Baron is not happy about this because to rule that planet is to also be very wealthy. And you don't want to let go of your wealth. So the Atreides walk into they walk into this new life for themselves with a target on their back. They're trying to be assassinated. They're trying to be set up for failure. Also in the midst of trying to learn how to live on this new planet. And that in and of itself is probably my absolute favorite thing about this. I think I'm really picky when it comes to like the political intrigue and warfare and things like that. Like, I don't like that kind of stuff to drag on too long because it does kind of get boring. It's so twisted and it's so cleverly woven into this book that I do really like the political intrigue. I think if that's something that you really like, you will really like this. There's not really any warfare because everything is like more kind of like secret assassins. So you're not like having these full out wars and battle scenes. There's none of that. Magic system. There's not really a magic system. There sort of is. We have some people that are called mentats, and they kind of have like a super brain. And then we have the Bene Gesserits. They're considered like witches, and they do kind of seem to have like this power and control over people's minds, which is really cool. But I wouldn't exactly call it like a magic system. They do have to like train, and there's also this whole, oh my gosh, like there's a lot going on in this book. I think, like I was saying, one of my favorite things about this book was getting to know the Fremen and what it means to live on a planet with very little water. Water is currency, and it is woven into their entire life. Taking water, any kind of moisture, is like gold. And it's so crazy. It's sometimes a little cringy how it's woven into here, but it's like so, it makes it so, just the details. The details, he did not skip a beat on the details, and they are like so good. Beyond that, to me, I really loved the writing and the descriptions. Like, I could like get lost there. Like, I would not want to go to a place that hot, like, and desolate, but for some reason he writes it in such a beautiful way that I could like close my eyes and see myself standing at the top of the dunes, just like looking at this whole sea of sand. And let's not mention, there are sandworms that live in the sand, enormous sandworms, and the Fremen have learned how to live with them. Oh, just everything about this. I feel like this has a lot of maybe Middle Eastern vibes with some of the names of the characters, some of the maybe the places, I watched the movie first, and then it took me a really long time to decide whether or not I was going to pick up this almost 900 or 800 page book, because that's quite a commitment. And also, you can't find this book at used bookstores despite it being quite old. I forget when it was first published, but this is not like new. The price of books, well, the price of everything has escalated a lot, and this mass market paperback goes for like $11. That's insane to me. And then I also heard a lot of people talking about how like the movie was better, what the book messed up, the movie fixed. There's a lot of criticism like that. And a lot of times I feel like I've been having that experience with a lot of book to movie adaptations where I tend to like the movie adaptation better. I am so glad I read this. I loved it so much. However, I will say that getting towards the end got a little weird, but it doesn't last long, and it was still worth the entire journey. Also, while reading this book, I ended up listening to Spotify a lot. If I can link them, I will try to link some of the Spotify and YouTube playlists that I was listening to while while reading this book, because it really enhanced my experience reading this, and it really kind of felt like, because I watched the movie first, I kind of like got to step back into the movie, which I feel like kind of gave me that whole like surround sound experience reading this book, and it was a really good time. That being said, this was a very long and intense book, so I wasn't going to pick up the second book. And well, I ended up picking up the second book just because I'm kind of all over the place right now. The second book, well, we'll talk about that when I'm only like 25 pages into that book. So, because Messiah is actually very short compared to this book, which is kind of odd. You would think they'd be relatively the same. So, I don't know what to think about that, but I guess we'll find out when I read it. Let's go ahead and move on to the next book. The next book I read was Looking for Alaska by John Green. I thought it would be a quick read. It was. The main character of this book has a thing for famous last words. I think that was really cool, like a little hobby. He goes to boarding school with these other kids and is really attracted to this one girl who kind of is wild. I guess she's got a lot of issues, and he kind of gravitates toward her, and they form a friend group. And that's pretty much it. It's just about their friend group and getting into trouble, doing kid stuff, drinking, smoking illegally at school, living large, and having these like confessional conversations. Until this tragedy strikes and a question arises that if it was or was not an accident, our main character tries to get down to the bottom of the truth. Honestly, I found this book pretty dull, except for the ending. Not bad. It's a solid book, and the ending was pretty hard-hitting. I think if I could have connected to the characters more, it would have been a different experience. Unfortunately, this book just isn't for me. As I've said many times, I don't care for books where all we do is talk and drink. So overall, it's just not for me. I think also if I had read this book when I was younger, like maybe in my 20s, it would have been a much different reading experience. I probably would have liked it. I think that a huge part of why I don't like books like that is just because I've been there and done that, and it's nothing new or exciting. And a lot of times these kind of make that kind of lifestyle seem romanticized and fun. Which, to be honest, it's not really. You can get into a lot of trouble. Most of us escape with our lives. You live and you learn, and a lot of those times can also leave us with a lot of baggage as well. That's kind of why I don't really like that kind of setting. Oh, I just thought it was boring. So, moving on to the next book. The next book I read was Castle in the Clouds by Kristen Gear. Everyone has been talking about this book, and it sounds so good. I did really enjoy this book. I thought it was super cute. I really liked the main character. I thought that she was hilarious, and I did end up giving this book about 3.5 stars. I was a little disappointed with it. I don't know what it was, because it really did have all of the elements. I'm wondering if this is more of a situation kind of like Fable. When I listened to an audiobook, I just really missed it there, and then I picked it up on physical book, and I fell in love with it. It was like my favorite book. I think the funniest part is how Sophie thinks about things, and how she reacts and the really quirky scenarios. I love that those are thrown in. The hotel itself is pretty interesting with like a mysterious cat and a ghost, and I feel like the narrator what was kind of throwing me as well, and one of the reasons why I couldn't get into this book. It also potentially could be like the execution and how I couldn't exactly connect to the characters. So that's Castle in the Clouds. The last book that I read was Lord of the Flies by William Golding. Most people know what this book is about. It's a bunch of kids on an island. They go savage. So just in case you didn't know. They wind up on this island because of a plane crash, and I guess all of these boys also went to boarding school together. Did they go together or they were at a boarding school? I don't know. Because it seems like they don't know each other. So why were they all on a plane together, and why was there no adults on the plane? We don't ask these questions. We just keep reading. Because that's not what it's about. It's about what happens to them on the island. So as time passes, they need food, they need shelter, they want to escape. They realize that they need a fire to have smoke, so hopefully a rescue ship can see them. And they also realize that they need a leader. So they start kind of dividing up in taking care of these needs. As more time passes, we have groups kind of break off. And we have this one group in specifically called Jack and the Hunters. Basically, they are kind of like Hitler and the Nazis. And the fear tactic that Jack uses to get the followers and how he appeals to certain natures, like natural natures, and how that leads them down the path of brutality. These are otherwise peaceful children. Then there's like everyone else in between. Something I found really fascinating about this book also was when it came to food and they decided they really wanted to eat meat, there was this sudden realization that you're going to have to kill an animal and then eat the animal that you killed, and that is hard. As a meat eater myself, I don't really relish the idea of killing an innocent animal. So you have some people that are like, yeah, whatever, like that's what we do, it's survival. And then we have people who are like, absolutely not, I'll stick to berries, I can't do that. And then we have kind of people in the middle kind of struggling with this idea, and like they want to eat but they don't want to kill it. And I thought that was very interesting. One part, it's probably the only thing I actually annotated in this book, but I found it particularly interesting because maybe it's because I am also viewing this book through the lens of a parent. Like, I'm a mom seeing these children with no adults to tell them that they're being too rough with each other and how to play nice and be kind to each other and like remind them of just how to be decent human beings. I have to do this with my own children a lot. So kind of reading this from a parent's perspective, I think gives me maybe a little bit different look at it. But I highlighted this one spot. Let's see, where should I start? Henry. I kind of need to start farther back. Roger stooped, picked up a stone, aimed, and threw it at Henry. Threw it to miss. The stone, that token of preposterous time, bounced 5 yards to Henry's right and fell in the water. Roger gathered a handful of stones and began to throw them. Yet there was a space around Henry, perhaps 6 yards in diameter, into which he dare not throw. Here, invisible yet strong, was the taboo of the old life. Round and squatting child was the protection of parents and school and policemen and the law. Roger's arm was conditioned by a civilization that knew nothing of him and was in ruins. So I really thought that this was particularly interesting because it's like, you know right from wrong. You don't throw rocks at other kids, but it's this realization that he could throw the rock and hit Henry and no one would be there to stop him if he really wanted to. That first taste of lawlessness. gosh, it's such a cool like position to be like, okay, do we choose right from wrong? Is it because we truly feel that it's wrong? Like, it's so interesting to see it from that perspective, I guess. Probably, I don't know if I would have read this book, except I could tick off a classic from classic book. I feel like a lot of people have read it, and my son Michael, who's 12, is reading it. Now that I finished it, and when he finally finishes it, he's got like 4 chapters left, I think, to go. I'm really eager to see what he gets from the book, especially being from the child's perspective. I'm mostly just glad that I read this book, and I definitely, again, much like Slaughterhouse-Five, I appreciate what this book is doing and what it has done. As I said, I find a lot of concepts really interesting, but to be perfectly honest, the reading process itself wasn't always enjoyable. So I did end up getting an audiobook of this to kind of help me get through the book. Maybe it's because I'm not a young boy and found some of the repetition, like calling the kid Piggy over and over again, kind of got old. Plus, maybe it's because I have 2 kids, I have 2 boys. I feel like I am constantly dealing with that type of hazing between the 2 of them on a daily basis as it is. So also reading about it is not the funnest. But I'm mostly just really excited that my 12-year-old is really into it and that he's getting something from it. I can absolutely see why he would like this book so much. And my son also is really into history. He really likes World War II era. And so I was sharing with him some of the background story of William Golding, who served in the war and therefore took a lot of his observations that he learned and inspired this book, like Hitler and the Nazis, the brutality of that. And that's that. Those are all the things that I read. And thank you so much for watching.